I wanted to spend a little time and talk with you about what a purchase agreement looks like. Whether you're going to write one today or write one in 6 months, the process is going to go much more smoothly if you've at least seen one before. And if you watch this video, it's going to walk you through everything kind of line by line. I will not be reading it line by line. I'm going to be summarizing. If you are a contract reader and want to read this, push pause whenever you need to, read away, and always reach out to me with any questions you might have. So we're going to start at the top. The first page is really where we're going to spend the most time. This is where almost all of the big important things are, and then the rest of the 11 pages is pretty simple. So we're going to start at the top, and on line 3 and 4, we're going to put your names. On line 5 and 6, we're going to write in how much earnest money you want to put down for the house that you're writing the offer on. Earnest money is a deposit that's collected by you and deposited with the seller's agent after your offer is accepted. So, if you don't get the house, you don't owe any money. But if you do get the house, you're going to have 3 business days to deposit this earnest money. Earnest money comes back to you if the inspection goes badly and you choose to cancel the purchase agreement. But assuming you don't cancel the purchase agreement as a result of the inspection, that earnest money is held there. And if you end up just not showing up to closing because you get cold feet, the seller's going to keep that money as damages. If you do show up to closing, which we hope you do, and do move forward with purchasing the house, that earnest money is basically a credit towards your down payment at the time of closing. Moving through to lines 11 through 15, that's just going to be the property address and legal description, which I'll take care of filling in for you. Lines 16 through 36, that is where you spell out boilerplate everything that you could possibly want included in the house that's part of the house, like the flooring and the electrical wiring and the roof and things that you can't imagine actually have to be defined as part of the house, but we do need to make sure that everything is very clear, so that's why you've got that, I don't know, however many lines of tiny little text that talks about stuff that's attached. There are a few items that are, of course, a bit more gray, like a refrigerator that you could unplug and carry off. That's going to be handled in a separate personal property agreement that we'll do, so we'll deal with all of those other items separately. Moving down to the bottom of the page, we have the purchase price on line 38 and 39. That's how much you want to pay for the house. And then on lines 40 through 46, we're going to tell the sellers how you plan to finance that property. On closing day, are you going to be bringing a 3% down payment or a 5% down payment or a 20% down payment? Or are you going to be paying 100% cash? That's where we tell them exactly how you're financing the house. Most people are going to be getting a loan of some sort, but we just need to tell them. Line 48 is the closing date. Closing date is the date which your down payment is owed. It's the date which you will go to the title company with your down payment money. You're going to sign a huge stack of paperwork, and then you're going to get the keys, and you're going to get to move in. So the closing date is a fun day. With properties that are getting financed, if you're getting a mortgage, usually that's the longest piece of this waiting game, is getting that loan done. It just takes a while. So normally a closing date from the time you write the purchase agreement to the time you're having a closing date is about 30 to 60 days. We do have to write a specific date in on line 48. We can't say the closing date shall be 30 to 60 days from now. We have to say the closing date will be June 1st or January 12th or whatever. Closing dates do have to be a business day, not a federal holiday. So Monday through Friday, that's not a federal holiday, and then we kind of look at the calendar 30 to 60 days out, and we pick a date that works for you. Going to page 2, if you are paying cash for the home, you can skip all of page 2 and fast forward in the video. If you're getting a mortgage, we're going to fill this in. We're going to say the purchase agreement is subject to you getting that mortgage. Even if you're pre-approved, the pre-approval process has 2 parts. The first part, which is what you have your pre-approval letter for, is pre-approving you as a buyer. It's saying that you as the buyer make enough money, have low enough debt, and have good enough credit to afford this type of house, whatever that house is. The second piece of a pre-approval has to do with the house itself. And so that second piece of the pre-approval can't really be done until you write a purchase agreement and then say, hey, lender, mortgage officer, I have a house that I'm writing a purchase agreement on. I need to get the rest of the loan approved. So we say on line 52 that it is subject to that second half of the mortgage pre-approval process happening. The things they pre-approved the house for are the title work. Is the seller of the house really truly the owner, and do they have the right to sell it? Wouldn't have to think about that normally, but a lender does. Is the property in good enough repair to be sold? And then the other piece is the value that you're paying for the house appropriate for what the loan officer is going to lend you? So are you paying $300,000 for a house that's actually only worth $200,000 for a house? That's part of the appraisal process. So all of that has to happen. We're going to check a series of boxes here on this page that are going to spell out for the sellers what pieces we need to get approved in order to make sure that this deal goes through. On the mortgage financing contingency on lines 70 through the end of that page, we're going to decide whether we're going to get that pre-approval piece, the second half, done by a certain date ahead of time, that's line 78 and 79, or if we're just going to get it done before closing, meaning it can happen up to the day of closing. I like to put a date in ahead of time because I think it's comforting for everybody to know that all of those things have been done well ahead of the day we're supposed to be signing paperwork, just to make sure. But we'll talk about the situation that's best for you. Moving to page 3, that's actually a continuation of that mortgage financing piece. And when we get to line 114, that tells the seller when you're going to lock your interest rate in, because presumably before you have a property identified, you're typically not allowed to lock your interest rate. Lender commitment work orders on line 118 through 127, frankly, doesn't apply to most properties. This applies only if a property is in horrible disrepair, and if the lender were to go out and decide that they're not even going to give you the loan unless certain repairs are made. We would put a dollar figure in there that the seller would be on the hook for. If you're getting an FHA loan, line 128, kind of through the first half of the next page, that'll apply. FHA just requires that the property value is appraised at least the purchase price. So if you're doing an FHA loan on line 133, we're going to write in the purchase price so that we're sure that those line up. We'll talk more about it if we need to. I don't see a ton of FHA loans in today's market. Otherwise, if you're not doing an FHA loan, when it comes to signing this, I'm just going to put a big red line through it. Moving to the next page, line 143, that only applies if you are a military veteran and you are getting a veteran's loan. Again, I don't see a ton of them. We will talk about it if it applies to you. Same with lines 148 through 157, also veterans loans only. If you're not getting a loan like that, you'll have a big red line through it. Moving down to line 158 through 166. Seller's contribution to buyer's costs. If you've ever heard the phrase seller paid closing costs, this is what they're talking about. When you buy a house, you have some closing costs as a buyer. It'll be your down payment is one chunk of the money that you owe on closing day, and then the other chunk of money that you owe on closing day is called closing costs. Closing costs are things like the fee you pay to your lender to get your loan, the fee you pay to the title company to do all the paperwork for you. There are some prepaid property taxes you might owe. There's probably homeowner's insurance that you'll owe. So there's a smattering of miscellaneous fees that all add up to your closing costs. If you want the sellers to pay those for you, we're going to fill that in here. I don't see that a ton in this market, but that's where we would address it. Moving down to the bottom of that page, we start talking through home inspections and whether or not you as the buyer want your purchase agreement subject to a home inspection. If you do want the property subject to home inspection, we're going to say if you elect to have an inspection, that yes, it is contingent on those results. The rest of that says that you, as the buyer, get to choose the inspector. The seller does not. The seller does have to let us in for those inspections, and that we don't owe them any information as a result of our inspection. That is an inspection that you pay for, it belongs to you, and you don't owe it to the sellers to share with them any information that you find out, unless you want to. We have the right, when we have the property inspected, to then renegotiate things with the sellers. We can either choose to ask them to repair items that come up as a result of the inspection, or you also have the right as the buyer to cancel the purchase agreement if there's something in the inspection that you are not comfortable with. Moving to the next page, on line 185, we're going to fill in the number of days that we have to do those inspections. Normal in this market is 5 to 10 days. Currently, as I'm doing this recording, we are in such a hot market that, quite frankly, a lot of people are just skipping inspections altogether. But again, we're going to address that on a case-by-case basis when it comes time to write the offer on your house. Sale of buyer's property from lines 198 through 213. We're going to talk about whether or not you have a house to sell and whether or not the purchase agreement that we're writing on a new house is contingent on you getting that home sold or not. My dog is next to me. He's sighing. He's so bored. Line 214 through 224 talks about property taxes. Typically, we're going to prorate property taxes, so the sellers are going to be responsible for the property taxes up to the day of closing, and then you, as the new owner, will take responsibility from the day of closing through the end of the year and moving forward every year after. The title company handles all those prorations for you, so it's not going to be anything you're going to need to think about. Then we get to page 6, deferred taxes and special assessments, lines 227 through 250. That talks about whether or not there are any special assessments to the tax bill. For example, if they've come through, the county's come through and said, we're going to do all new curbs, all new gutters, all new curbs, all new sewer systems, sidewalks, whatever. Sometimes they'll charge each individual house through their property tax bill for those improvements. If for some reason the property tax bill has any of those items on it, we're going to say typically that the sellers are going to pay those off prior to you taking ownership. And then additional provisions. 252 through 257 says that you have not or have written a purchase agreement on something else that we need to cancel first before we can write this purchase agreement. 258 through the end of the page talks about the type of title that you're going to take from the sellers when they transfer the deed over. Usually we're going to do a warranty deed. That's the most complete form of ownership for you, meaning that the sellers are going to retain no further rights to the house after closing. Moving to page 7, 271 through 275, we talk about possession. How soon do you want to move in after closing? Usually we're going to say immediately. And then moving down, we have a handful of kind of boilerplate stuff. Linked devices talks about the fact that the sellers do have to disconnect anything that they can control with their phone. Sometimes it's a garage door opener, sometimes it's a thermostat. You have to disconnect all of that before you move in. Prorations, that just says that if there are any prorations, any monthly fees like a homeowners association fee that's paid on the month, that everything's going to be prorated to the day of closing. Title and examination, line 283 through 301. And that says that everybody's going to hire a title company. You're going to have one and the sellers are going to have one, and those title companies are going to work together to make sure that the title on the property can actually be transferred from the sellers to you. If there are any issues with the title work, everybody would get an automatic 30-day extension of our closing date in order for the title companies to try to get it straightened out. I can say that in 20 years of doing this and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of transactions, I have never had that happen. If we are buying a property where they are subdividing the lot, lines 302 to 306 will apply. Very rare. Line 307 through 309 says that if the sellers have had work done on the property in the previous 4 months prior to closing, they do have to get something called a lien waiver that proves that they have paid that contractor in full, so that you, as the new owner, don't move in and then start getting bills for repairs that were done on the house. That's not very fun. Line 310 through 313 tells you that the sellers have not received any notices from any governing authorities that the property has been condemned. Line 314 through 316 says that the dimensions that we see on the multiple listing service or on any marketing, they're reliable, but they're not 100% guaranteed. So if you see that the bedroom is 10 feet by 16 feet, we should go measure it if you know you absolutely have to have specific dimensions. Access agreement on line 317 says they have to let us in. The sellers have to let us in for appointments like inspections, appraisals, etc. More boilerplate. 321 through 326 says that if we come to an agreement on this purchase and everybody signs it, it is legally binding. However, If the property is then destroyed by fire, flood, tornado, etc., you can get out of the purchase and you would get your earnest money back. 327 through 333 just kind of defines out timing, what a business day is, what end of day is, kind of basic stuff. 334 through 340 tells where your earnest money should go under different scenarios. If you cancel during inspection, it comes back to you. If we get to a closing, which we should, it is applied as a credit towards your down payment, etc. And then 341. This is a legally binding contract. Once you sign it and once the sellers sign it, if either party defaults, the other party can seek legal action. Line 353 through 357 discuss where to go if you want to find out if there are any sexual predators in your current or future neighborhoods. There's a phone number as well as the Department of Corrections website. The bottom big box there talks about the seller's disclosure statement. By the time we get to the point where we're writing an offer, we will have seen a seller's disclosure statement where the sellers talk through all the things about the house that they know that have happened during their ownership or prior to their ownership, and we're going to check the box that says we've seen that. The big box at the top of the next page talks about whether the house is hooked up to city sewer and or city water systems, and whether or not we need private tests done on those systems. Home warranty. If you would like to purchase a home warranty for yourself, or if you'd like the sellers to purchase a home warranty for you, we're going to check the boxes there as appropriate. Line 395 through 400 tells you who's on whose side when it comes to the agents in the transaction. Who is representing the sellers, who is representing the buyers, or are they both representing both parties? Dual agency representation. If both parties are represented by the same real estate brokerage, we're in dual agency, we check the box and we sign. If not, we skip it and there'll be a big red line through it. 423 through 424 just acknowledges that when you buy a house and when you sell a house, there are closing costs. Line 425 through 427 allows the title company to give me a copy of the final numbers a few days before closing, just so that I can get the second set of eyes on them to make sure that they say what we think they should say and that the numbers are right. There's nothing worse than going to closing day and looking at the numbers in front of you and realizing that they're wrong, and then having to wait for everybody to redo stuff. Lines 428 through 444 lets you know that if you're buying a property from someone who is a non-U.S. citizen or permanent resident, there would be additional paperwork for you to sign. Almost at the end. Line 444 through 445 lets you know, this one's kind of important, that until everybody has signed everything and everybody has a copy of everything, anybody can change their minds. So we always want to make sure we're signing things as quickly as we're able. I get them off to the other party as quickly as we're able, just to keep things moving and make sure that we get ourselves under contract and legal as soon as possible. Electronic signatures are legal and binding in the state of Minnesota, and the purchase agreement that you're signing with the sellers is the whole thing. This acknowledges that you're not going to make a side deal with the sellers where you're going to kick back money to them in the parking lot after closing. Line 454 says that any warranties specified in the purchase agreement will survive that closing date and the delivery of the deed. And then I don't know why they have to define this, but the date of the purchase agreement is the date of the purchase agreement. This is where we're going to check off whether or not there are any additional addenda that we've included. Sometimes we will, sometimes we won't. Will kind of depend on your situation. And then last but not least, we have the signature page where you sign everything. At the very bottom of this, the big box, that talks about arbitration, which is an optional system of dispute resolution in the state of Minnesota. And we'll talk in more detail about that when the time comes as well. That's the whole thing. Under 20 minutes. Dang. It's actually twice as long as I thought this video would be. But like I said, it's important information. Please contact me. We can talk through any specifics, either well ahead of time or while we're in the process of writing an offer. But hopefully this has been helpful for you and you've got a little better feel for what you're going to be looking at when the time